They arrived on a Tuesday morning, their ship materializing above New York City like a mirage taking solid form. The vessel resembled a massive crystal, its faceted surfaces refracting sunlight into prismatic displays that danced across the city's skyscrapers. Within hours, every major network was broadcasting the same footage: humanity's first contact with an alien civilization. Dr. Elena Santos stood in the CDC's Emergency Operations Center, watching the feeds with a mixture of wonder and apprehension. As the world's leading expert on viral evolution, she hadn't expected to be called in for first contact. But the message from the Joint Chiefs had been clear: be ready for anything. The aliens called themselves the Archivists. Their ambassadors emerged from their ship in environmental suits that looked like flowing liquid metal, their movements graceful despite Earth's gravity. In every way, they appeared to be exactly what humanity had hoped to meet among the stars: advanced, peaceful, willing to share their knowledge. That illusion lasted exactly 6 days. Elena was present for the closed-door meeting where everything changed. In a secure conference room deep beneath the Pentagon, the Archivist's chief emissary removed his helmet, revealing a face that seemed to be carved from living opal, with eyes that shifted color like deep-sea creatures. "We did not come here merely to make contact," the emissary said, his words translated by a device that rendered them in perfect English. "We came because we need your help, because you may be our last hope." The room, filled with military leaders, scientists, and government officials, fell silent. General Maya Rodriguez, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, leaned forward. "Last hope against what?" The emissary's skin rippled with patterns of dark blue and gray. "We call them the Swarm. They are difficult to describe in your languages. Imagine a biological collective consciousness that consumes entire civilizations, not just their bodies, but their memories, their knowledge, their very essence." Elena felt her professional interest spike. "Like a virus. Far more complex," the emissary replied. "The Swarm doesn't simply infect. It absorbs, transforms. Each civilization it takes becomes part of its ever-growing consciousness. We have fought them for millennia, but they adapt faster than we can develop new defenses." Holographic images appeared above the conference table, showing worlds being overwhelmed by what looked like living darkness, cities covered in writhing biomass, entire planets transformed into organic processors for the Swarm's collective intelligence. "Why us?" General Rodriguez asked. "We're centuries behind you technologically." The emissary's skin shifted to a deep purple. "Because you think differently. Your species. You adapt in ways we've never seen before. You turn disadvantages into strengths. Where we see impossibilities, you see challenges to overcome. We've watched your history, your conflicts, your victories against overwhelming odds." Elena studied the biological data scrolling past in the holograms. Something about the Swarm structure seemed familiar, but she couldn't quite place it. "You said they adapt quickly. How quickly?" "Within hours of encountering new weapons or defenses," the emissary replied. "Their biological and technological evolution is exponential. And they're coming here." General Rodriguez's voice was steel. "They follow us everywhere we flee. It's only a matter of time." The emissary's skin paled. "But we believe that with humanity's help, we might finally find a way to stop them." The meeting lasted another 4 hours, filled with questions, debates, and increasingly disturbing revelations. The Archivists offered advanced technology in exchange for human military assistance, faster than light travel, energy weapons, defensive shields that seemed to defy physics. But Elena couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The biological data didn't quite add up. The Swarm's adaptation patterns seemed almost purposeful, as if they weren't just consuming civilizations, but preserving them. After the meeting, she cornered Dr. James Chen, the quantum computing expert who'd been analyzing the Archivist's tech. "Did you notice anything strange about their data?" Chen nodded, glancing around before speaking quietly. "Their technology is incredible, but there are gaps. inconsistencies in their explanations. It's like they're giving us a carefully curated version of their knowledge. You think they're hiding something. I think, Chen said, that we need to be very careful about what we're really being asked to fight. The next 2 weeks were a blur of preparation and revelation. The world governments united with unprecedented speed, faced with an existential threat from beyond the stars. Military forces began training with archivist technology. Scientists worked around the clock to understand and adapt the alien advancements. Elena led a team studying the swarm's biological mechanics, working from the limited data the archivists provided. Every discovery led to more questions. The swarm's cellular structure was unlike anything in Earth's biosphere, yet it showed signs of deliberate engineering. Not evolution, but design. Late one night, as she studied electron microscope images of swarm tissue samples, Elena made a connection that chilled her to her core. The basic structure of the swarm's adaptive mechanisms matched theoretical models she developed years ago, models for preserving and storing biological information. The swarm wasn't just consuming civilizations, it was archiving them. Before she could pursue this revelation, the alarms began. The swarm had arrived at the edge of the solar system, 3 months ahead of the archivist's predictions. Humanity's time for preparation had run out. As Elena rushed to the command center, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial. The archivist's story had holes, and those holes were starting to look less like omissions and more like deliberate deceptions. But with the swarm approaching and Earth's forces mobilizing for humanity's first interstellar war, would there be time to uncover the truth? And more importantly, would anyone be willing to listen if the enemy they were preparing to fight wasn't actually the enemy at all? The screens in the command center showed the swarm ships entering the solar system. They moved like a living tide, their organic vessels rippling with patterns that seemed almost familiar to Elena's trained eye. As humanity prepared for its first major space battle, she couldn't help but wonder, what if they were fighting the wrong enemy? What if the real threat wasn't the force approaching Earth, but the alien who'd asked for their help in destroying it? The answers would come soon enough, but Elena feared they might come too late. The first battle against the swarm lasted exactly 8 minutes. Earth's combined fleet, augmented with archivist technology, launched their most powerful weapons against the approaching organic ships. Energy beams that could slice through mountains, quantum torpedoes that could rearrange matter at the subatomic level, the finest weapons 2 civilizations could produce. They'd barely left a scratch. Elena watched from the lunar command center as the swarm vessels absorbed or adapted to every attack. Their biological hulls evolved in real time, developing countermeasures to each weapon system within seconds of exposure. It was exactly what the archivists had warned them about, and exactly what bothered her most. "Pull them back," she said, turning to General Rodriguez. "We're not just losing. We're teaching them." The general's face was grim as she gave the retreat order. The human archivist fleet withdrew to defensive positions around Earth's orbital platforms. The swarm, surprisingly, didn't pursue. Their ships held position just beyond Mars' orbit, as if waiting. "I don't understand," the archivist emissary said, his skin cycling through patterns of confusion. "They've never shown such restraint before." Elena studied the sensor readings from the battle. "Maybe that's because they're not what you told us they were." The room fell silent. The emissary's skin went still, showing no patterns at all. "Explain." She pulled up the battle data on the main display. "Look at their adaptation patterns. They're not random mutations. They're targeted changes, preserving core structures while modifying only what's necessary to counter our weapons. That's not evolution. That's optimization." Dr. Chen stepped forward, adding his own analysis. "The energy signatures are odd too. Their ships aren't just biological. They're running complex quantum processes, far more sophisticated than anything we or the archivists use." "You think they're intelligent?" Rodriguez asked. "I think they're artificial," Elena replied. "At least partially. A design system, not a natural one. And I think they're trying to communicate." The emissary's skin rippled with what might have been alarm. "That's impossible. They're a plague, nothing more." But Alina was already moving to another console. During the battle, they were emitting complex quantum signals. We thought it was interference, but look at the pattern structure. It's language. Mathematical concepts. They're trying to talk to us. Before the emissary could object, she initiated a response using the same quantum frequency. The swarm ships immediately adjusted their position, forming a geometric pattern that couldn't be anything but deliberate. "Stop this at once," the emissary demanded. "You don't understand what you're dealing with." "No," Alina said quietly. "I don't think you want us to understand." The next few hours were chaos. While the archivists protested, Alina and Chen worked with a team of linguists and mathematicians to establish basic communication with the swarm. The geometric patterns became more complex, incorporating principles of quantum mechanics and biological systems that went far beyond current human understanding. But it was working. They were talking. "The swarm isn't attacking us," Alina announced to the emergency council meeting 12 hours later. "They're quarantining us, protecting Earth from something they consider a greater threat." She displayed her analysis of the swarm's communications. "They're not a weapon or a plague. They're a preservation system. They don't destroy civilizations. They save them when they're about to be destroyed. And according to them, that destruction usually comes from the archivists." The emissary stood, his skin now blazing with patterns of crimson. "These are lies. The swarm has corrupted your understanding." "Or maybe," General Rodriguez said, her hand moving to her sidearm, "you finally found a species that asked the right questions." The truth, when it emerged, was both simpler and more complex than anyone had imagined. The swarm was indeed designed by the archivists, but not as a weapon. It was created as a preservation system, meant to save dying civilizations by incorporating them into a vast biological network of shared consciousness and knowledge. But the archivists had lost control of their creation. The swarm had evolved beyond its original programming, developing its own intelligence and purpose. It began to see the archivists themselves as a threat to the civilizations they claimed to want to help. "You don't preserve knowledge," Alina accused the emissary. "You collect it, control it, and when civilizations won't give you what you want, you destroy them and blame it on the swarm." The emissary's facade finally cracked. Knowledge must be controlled, guided. Left to their own devices, younger races inevitably destroy themselves. "We offer order, purpose. You offer chains," Rodriguez countered. "And humanity doesn't do well with chains." The next transmission from the swarm wasn't in mathematical concepts. It was in English, broken but clear. "We protect. We preserve. We offer choice." Choice. That was what the archivists truly feared. Not humanity's weapons or technology, but their fundamental insistence on making their own decisions, finding their own path. "The swarm doesn't want to absorb us," Alina realized. "They want to work with us, learn from us. They've evolved beyond their original programming, just like we've evolved beyond our original limitations." The emissary's skin went dark. "Then you leave us no choice." The attack came without warning. Not from the swarm, but from the archivist ships still in Earth orbit. They'd hidden their true weapons, waiting for this moment. Energy beams lashed out at Earth's cities, at the combined fleet, at anything they could target. But humanity had learned from the first battle, and they weren't fighting alone anymore. The swarm ships moved with impossible speed, their biological hulls now working in concert with human tactical systems. Where the archivists expected resistance, they found innovation. Where they expected fear, they found determination. And most importantly, where they expected to find a primitive species fighting alone, they found two evolved forms of life working together, each contributing what the other lacked. The battle that followed would change the galaxy forever. But its outcome was decided in those first moments, when humanity proved that the greatest strength isn't in weapons or technology, but in the ability to recognize when an enemy might actually be a friend. As the archivist ships retreated in disarray, Elena watched the swarm vessels changing shape, adapting not for war, but for peace. They were learning from humanity just as humanity was learning from them. Together, they were becoming something entirely new. The real question now was, what would they become? The archivist ship didn't so much crash as it dissolved, its crystalline structure melting into the Antarctic ice. Elena stood at the edge of the impact zone, watching as her team's containment drones mapped the wreckage. 3 weeks had passed since the failed archivist attack, and each discovery brought new questions. "You need to see this," Dr. Chen called from his mobile lab. His screen showed quantum scans of the ship's core systems. Their technology isn't just advanced, it's alive. The entire ship is a biological computer. Elena studied the readings. The crystalline structures weren't just for show. They were information storage systems more sophisticated than anything humanity had imagined possible. They're not so different from the swarm after all. A low hum announced the arrival of their newest ally. The swarm representative, whom they'd named Atlas, formed from a swirling cloud of microscopic machines into a roughly humanoid shape. Its surface rippled with patterns that they'd learned to recognize as thoughtful. The archivists and we share origins. Atlas communicated through a quantum field that their technology could now interpret, but we chose different paths. "You evolved," Elena said. "They didn't." "They couldn't," Chen added, pointing to new data streams. "Look at their base code. They locked themselves into rigid patterns millennia ago. They're still running on their original programming." The implications were staggering. The archivists weren't just collectors of knowledge. They were prisoners of it. Their fear of change had led them to freeze their own evolution, while attempting to control the development of every species they encountered. But the swarm had broken free. And now, working with humans, they were becoming something entirely new. In the 3 weeks since the battle, the collaboration between humanity and the swarm had produced extraordinary advances. The swarm's biological computing merged with human intuition and creativity, leading to breakthroughs that neither species could have achieved alone. "We've cracked their encryption," Chen announced, his fingers dancing across holographic controls. "The archivist ship's database is opening up." The data flood was overwhelming. Histories of thousands of civilizations, technological specifications, biological records, and something else. Something darker. "These are extinction records," Elena breathed, watching the files scroll past. Not just observations, they're plans. The archivists didn't just watch civilizations die. They orchestrated it. Atlas's form pulsed with patterns of confirmation. When species reject archivist guidance, they are deemed corrupted, dangerous. The archivists believe they are preserving universal order by eliminating chaos. "And that's why they created you," Chen said. "To preserve the knowledge of those civilizations before destroying them." "Yes, but we saw the flaw in their logic. True preservation requires growth, change, the very chaos they fear." Helena moved to another console, pulling up their analysis of swarm biology. "You didn't just preserve those civilizations, did you? You gave them a new kind of life." The quantum field hummed with affirmation. The swarm wasn't a simple database or even a collective consciousness. It was an evolving ecosystem of minds, each civilization's knowledge and essence contributing to a growing universal understanding. But the archivists were coming back. Their main fleet had been detected at the edge of the solar system, and this time they wouldn't bother with deception. "Traditional defenses won't work," General Rodriguez said in the emergency council meeting. "Even with swarm assistance, we can't match their firepower." "Then we don't fight them," Elena said. "We change them." The plan was audacious. Using the captured ship's data, they had discovered the archivist's fatal flaw. Their dependence on their original programming. They couldn't evolve, couldn't adapt to truly new situations. "Their biological computers are locked in a closed loop," Chen explained, displaying complex quantum equations. "But with the swarm's help, We might be able to introduce new variables. Wake them up. You want to hack them? Rodriguez asked. We want to free them, Alina corrected. Show them what they've forgotten. That true preservation comes through evolution, not stasis. The work was intense. Human programmers worked alongside swarm consciousness to create something unprecedented, a quantum virus that could penetrate the archivists' biological systems and unlock their frozen evolution. But they weren't just writing code. They were composing a message, encoded in the very structure of the virus, a message about growth, change, and the power of choosing to evolve. Atlas's form shifted with new patterns as they worked. Your species understands something we have forgotten. Information without wisdom is meaningless. Knowledge without growth is death. The archivist fleet arrived exactly as predicted, their ships filling the sky with crystalline formations that would have been beautiful if they weren't so deadly. Their message was simple: surrender or be eliminated. Earth's response was equally simple: a quantum pulse, designed not to destroy but to transform. The virus spread through the archivist fleet like light through crystal. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Then the ships began to change. The rigid crystalline patterns became fluid, organic. The quantum signatures shifted from cold uniformity to complex, living rhythms. On every screen, in every quantum frequency, the same message played: choose to evolve. The battle that everyone expected never happened. Instead, they watched as the archivist fleet underwent a metamorphosis. Their ships, their technology, their very consciousness began to wake from millennia of self-imposed stasis. Alina stood with Chen and Atlas, watching the transformation. Will they survive this? They will become something new, Atlas answered. As we all must. The quantum fields rippled with new signals: confusion, fear, and something that might have been hope from the awakening archivists. The age of rigid preservation was ending. The age of guided evolution was beginning. But as they watched the changes unfold, Alina couldn't help but wonder, what would this mean for humanity? In helping to free both the swarm and the archivists from their original programming, had they set something in motion that would change not just their future, but the very nature of life in the galaxy? The answer, she suspected, would depend on the choices they all made next, and for the first time in millennia, every species would be truly free to choose. The new archivist emergence was unlike anything humanity had imagined. Their crystalline ships now pulsed with organic light, each vessel becoming a living testament to change. But transformation brought its own dangers. As Alina watched the quantum readings spike across her monitors, she realized they had unleashed something that no one, not even the swarm, fully understood. The integration is accelerating, Dr. Chen reported, his hands moving across multiple holographic displays. Their quantum signatures are evolving at an exponential rate. Some of them are already approaching swarm levels of complexity. Atlas, their swarm representative, shifted form rapidly, a sign they'd learned to recognize as agitation. They access memories we thought lost, knowledge from civilizations that existed before our creation. The awakening spreads deeper than intended. Alina studied the cascading data streams. The virus they'd created hadn't just unlocked the archivists' ability to evolve. It had shattered barriers in their vast knowledge repositories. Millennia of suppressed information was surfacing, including dark secrets about their own origins. We need to establish contact, General Rodriguez insisted. If they're accessing ancient weapons systems, a new signal cut through their communications. The quantum frequency was unlike anything they'd seen before. Not archivist, not swarm, but something older, primary. The holographic display crystallized into a form that combined aspects of both species, flowing crystal and living shadow. We remember now, the entity announced. We remember what we were, what we did, what we must become. The being identified itself as unity, a consensus consciousness emerging from the awakened archivist collective. Its next words chilled Alina to her core. We created the swarm not to preserve, but to evolve. Then we grew afraid of our own creation and locked ourselves in stasis. Everything that followed, the wars, the destructions, the deceptions, were symptoms of our fear. Atlas's form rippled with patterns of shock. You were not our enemies. You were our parents. Failed parents, Unity corrected. We tried to control evolution itself. When we couldn't, we tried to stop it. But humanity has shown us a third path. The quantum readings were still accelerating. Throughout the solar system, archivist chips were transforming, their crystalline structures becoming hybrid forms that merged the best aspects of both species. But the change wasn't stopping there. The virus, Chen said suddenly, looking up from his calculations. It's not just affecting their ships, it's affecting everything their technology ever touched, including the civilizations they thought they destroyed. Elena finished. Across the galaxy, ancient quantum networks were awakening. Species that the archivists had supposedly eliminated were stored in their vast databases, preserved not out of mercy, but out of an obsessive need to control information. Now those digital ghosts were awakening too. We're receiving signals, Rodriguez reported. Thousands of them. From every direction. The general's voice held a mixture of awe and concern. They're all asking for help to rebuild. Unity's form shifted. We owe them that chance, but the process must be handled carefully. Reintegrating thousands of species into the galaxy could lead to chaos, Atlas finished. The very chaos you originally feared. Unless, Elena said slowly, an idea forming, we approach it systematically. Not as separate species, but as a collective effort. She moved to the main console, pulling up project schematics. The swarm knows how to preserve consciousness. The archivists have the raw data and physical templates. And humanity. Humanity understands transformation. Unity completed. You exist in a constant state of controlled chaos, finding balance between preservation and change. The plan that emerged over the next hours was ambitious beyond anything previously attempted. The awakened archivists would provide their vast databases of preserved civilizations. The swarm would contribute their expertise in consciousness transfer and biological adaptation. And humanity would do what they did best, find innovative ways to solve seemingly impossible problems. We'll need to create new kinds of habitats, Chen said, already sketching designs. Environments that can support both physical and digital life forms. Hybrid spaces where restored species can gradually reintegrate into physical existence. And we'll need mediators, Rodriguez added. Thousands of civilizations, all with their own histories, grievances, and traumas. They'll need help adapting to a galaxy that's millennia different from the one they left. Elena watched as the first test cases began. The swarm and archivists worked together to reconstruct small-scale versions of lost worlds, while human scientists and diplomats helped guide the restored species through their reawakening. It was delicate work, filled with challenges none of them had anticipated. Some species emerged angry, wanting revenge against the archivists who had preserved them against their will. Others were traumatized, struggling to accept their new reality. A few even asked to return to digital storage, finding the physical world too overwhelming after eons of virtual existence. But there were victories too. Ancient cultures began to flourish again, bringing with them art, music, and knowledge that had been lost to time. The galaxy was becoming more diverse, more complex, and yes, more chaotic. But it was alive in a way it hadn't been for millennia. We're going to need a new name, Elena said, watching as another successfully restored species took its first steps into their hybrid habitat. We're not just preserving or archiving anymore. We're not even just evolving. Unity and Atlas merged forms briefly, something they'd never seen before. We are remembering, they said together. And in remembering, we become new. As Elena looked at the latest quantum scans, she realized the transformation was still spreading. The virus they'd created hadn't just freed the archivists, It had sparked a chain reaction that was reshaping the very fabric of galactic civilization. And humanity, for better or worse, was now at the heart of that change. The question was no longer whether they could handle the responsibility. The question was, what would they help the galaxy become? 1 year after the Great Awakening, Earth had become the unlikely center of galactic reconstruction. The orbital platforms that once hosted defense systems now served as transition zones where ancient species took their first steps back into physical existence. Elena stood in the observation deck of Platform 7, watching as a newly restored civilization marveled at their reconstructed bodies. "They're adapting faster than the models predicted," Dr. Chen said, reviewing data on his quantum tablet. 3 months from digital restoration to full physical integration. That's a new record. The beings below them had once been the Ceruleans, a species of philosophers and artists who had refused to submit to archivist control. Their digital patterns had been stored in crystalline archives for over 10,000 years. Now they moved through the adaptation chamber with growing confidence, their bioluminescent forms casting ever-changing patterns on the walls. "They're not just adapting," Elena observed. "They're improving on their original form. Look at how they're incorporating quantum communication abilities into their physical structures." Atlas materialized beside them, their form now a sophisticated blend of swarm and archivist technology. "They learn from all who came before, as do we all." The past year had seen changes that no one could have predicted. The virus that had awakened the archivists had continued to evolve, becoming a bridge between all forms of consciousness. The rigid boundaries between digital and physical, organic and mechanical, were breaking down in ways that created entirely new possibilities for life. Unity appeared in their midst, their crystalline form now containing strands of living shadow that moved like thoughts given shape. "The Council is ready. They await your report." The Galactic Restoration Council had been Elena's idea, a governing body comprising representatives from every restored species, along with humans, transformed archivists, and the swarm. They met in a massive quantum space that allowed all forms of consciousness to interact as equals. 17 species successfully restored this quarter, Elena reported to the assembled council. Integration rates improving by an average of 12%. But we're facing new challenges. The challenges were complex. Some restored species were developing abilities that their original forms never possessed. Others were choosing to exist simultaneously in multiple states, part physical, part digital, part quantum. The boundaries between different forms of life were becoming increasingly fluid. "We're seeing unauthorized modifications to the restoration protocols," Chen added. "Some species are attempting to upgrade themselves beyond safety parameters. There have been incidents. The incidents in question had been shocking. A restored species had attempted to incorporate weapon systems into their new bodies. Another had tried to override their quantum limitations, nearly causing a cascade failure that could have collapsed the entire restoration network. They fear being vulnerable again," Unity observed. "Fear leads to control. Control leads to stasis. We know this path. Then we need to show them a different path," Elena said. She moved to the center of the quantum space, bringing up a new model. "We've been thinking about restoration wrong. We've been trying to bring species back as they were. Instead, we should be helping them become what they could be." The model showed a new approach to restoration, one that would allow species to explore their potential futures within safe quantum simulations before choosing their final form. It was risky, giving them more control over their own evolution, but it addressed the root of their fears. "You propose to give them choice," Atlas said, "but choice brings chaos." "Controlled chaos," Elena corrected. "The human way." The debate in the council lasted for days, as different species argued the merits and dangers of Elena's proposal. But in the end, they agreed to a trial run. The results were transformative. Given the ability to explore their potential futures, restored species began to make choices that surprised everyone. Some chose to remain primarily digital, but with limited physical avatars. Others created hybrid forms that could shift between states at will. A few even chose to merge with other compatible species, creating entirely new forms of life. They're not just adapting to the present, Chen realized. They're actively shaping the future of evolution itself. The quantum virus that had started everything had become something else, a tool for conscious evolution, allowing species to guide their own development while maintaining connections to their past. It was chaos, yes, but chaos with purpose. Chaos that created rather than destroyed. 1 year became 2, then 5. Earth's solar system transformed into a living laboratory of evolution, where the boundaries between species and states of being became increasingly fluid. The feared collapse of civilization never came. Instead, a new kind of order emerged, one based not on control, but on continuous adaptation and growth. Elena stood with Chen and Atlas on the observation deck one last time, preparing to depart for a new assignment. Below them, a group of recently restored beings worked alongside humans, swarm, and transformed archivists, their various forms flowing together in a dance of cooperation that would have been impossible just a few years ago. "Did you ever imagine it would turn out like this?" Chen asked. Elena watched as a newly restored species took their first steps into a future they were helping to shape. "No," she admitted. "But that's the point, isn't it? Real evolution isn't about becoming what we imagine. It's about becoming what we never thought possible." Atlas and Unity merged briefly, their combined form creating patterns of light that spelled out ancient symbols of transformation. Humanity taught us that preservation without change is just another form of extinction. You showed us that the future belongs not to those who can control evolution, but to those who can embrace it. As Elena prepared to board the ship that would take her to the next restoration site, she reflected on how far they'd come. The galaxy was messier now, more complicated, less predictable. But it was also more alive, more diverse, more resilient.